Let me give you some housekeeping items. I'm going to turn the time over to Bobby, and we're going to learn. I mean, he and I have been having these conversations, and I think that some of the opinions will come out, but this concept of 2.0 for what we would call equity mining or owner marketing, I think is really, really an engaging discussion. And we'll get into that. But before we do, a couple things. First of all, we're using Zoom for this. So if you hover over the lower part of your window, you'll see a chat button. Pop that thing up. And that's what we're going to use to answer questions. I'll watch Q&A as well, so don't worry about it. But at the end of the day, chat is a good place for us to kind of get some dialogue and discussions going. In addition, anybody who registered for this will get the recording. It's going to go out probably later today or tomorrow, and you'll get it in your inbox, or you can look at it on the driving sales community as well. So don't worry if you're in the middle of a couple of things and you miss a point or two. You'll be able to kind of refresh, or if you want to show other members of your team. So without further ado, Bobby, why don't you kick this thing off, introduce yourself, and let's talk about owner marketing.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you, Bart, and thanks to Bart, Natalie, and the driving sales team for helping to put this thing together. So I'm excited about this topic, and so my name is Bobby Goodrow. I head up sales in marketing, and I'm somewhat involved with the product strategy for Activator Dealer Solutions. So if you haven't heard of Activator Dealer Solutions, you probably heard of Dominion Enterprises, which is our parent company. So Activator Dealer Solutions is one of 5 businesses in Dominion's automotive division. And then Dominion Enterprises is a large conglomerate based in Norfolk, Virginia, with portfolio companies in automotive, data, real estate, travel, and media, which is where Dominion initially got its start over 100 years ago. And so the topic today, and I kind of like that, equity or customer marketing 2.0. So we might take that, right? But it's really about thinking beyond equity, but it's really rethinking your marketing really for new and used and in service. And it's all really starts and ends with loyalty, and it all really starts and ends about how can you as a dealership today and in tomorrow attract, engage, and convert more customers. And kind of throughout this, hopefully I'll do a good job of kind of unpacking and defining kind of what does that mean, right? What does attract, what does engage, what does convert really mean in the context of what we're trying to do here. And I mean, look, like everybody else, we're a business that's trying to make money and be profitable and grow. And just like every other business, we've been forced to look at our own business model, and we've been forced to ask the questions: what makes us unique? What makes us valuable? How do we win? How do we win more? In a very competitive market. So kind of be walking through all that today. And I don't have a ton of slides. There's probably only about 7 slides, I think, in this entire deck, including this title slide here. And I think we're scheduled for an hour. I don't anticipate that these slides will probably go more than probably 25, 30 minutes tops, depending if I get going. And then we'll open it up for some questions. So, with that, also thanks to all the participants and attendees that are with us today. So in terms of what I'll kind of go through today, really hit on some themes. So one is looking at some past approaches and defining a few areas. And I'll probably spend most of the time on kind of our current environment, our current situation, and really thinking about asking that big downward pressure question, right? From a dealership perspective, how do I sell more cars, and how do I manage service in today's environment, right? And then underneath that is is all of these downward pressures that we're facing right now that we weren't anticipating, how does this influence your approach at the dealership? And then equally as important, how is this influencing your customer's approach? And then that'll flip over to looking at what does the future look like from our perspective, kind of what is the art of the possible for how you're managing sales and the service drive and service and customer retention. And so just taking a step back, right? It's complicated, but it's not, right? On one hand, you've got a dealership that is in the business to sell things, right? You're trying to sell cars, trying to sell F&I services, trying to sell service. And then on the other hand, you've got customers who hopefully want to buy what you're selling, right? In many cases, they have to buy things. So there's some kind of a compelling event. And so we want to operate in the middle of that and help to answer the questions. How do we help you do a better job of attracting, engaging, and keeping engaged customers and being ready to convert when it's appropriate at their particular stage or inflection point in their journey? And it's funny, earlier this week, and I'm going to touch on this example, and I kind of thought, as I was thinking about my notes today, I decided to tell this quick story. But earlier this week, we were interviewing a candidate to come work for us, not on the sales end. He's actually more of a technical role with some of the things we're doing on the back end of our product. So his background is in kind of big data visualization. He's going to join us as kind of a platform designer and architect with some of the back end of what we're doing. During COVID, he was actually working in a similar role for a software company that built and sold and built websites in the hospitality industry, and specifically for restaurants. And they had a pretty good business that was very niche, very similar to the world that we live in automotive, right? We've got a lot of the CRM companies, website companies, DMS companies just focus in that industry, similar to them. They were the company that provided this for restaurants. But then when COVID hit, that threw their business into a tizzy, because a lot of these restaurants were just hoping they were going to be in business the next month. And the last thing they were thinking about was, buying a new website for their business. And after things, quote unquote, normalized a little bit, they pivoted their business and they became a platform to help restaurants with the online ordering. Wasn't anything that they had been considering beforehand, but it completely changed their business model. And they took what looked like was a crisis and was going to jeopardize their business's longevity, and it turned into an actual boon for them. And they created a great service that didn't already exist. It helped them to deflect cost for the restaurant, and for the customers that were paying premiums to Grubhub or Uber Eats or some of these other places. And then it became a great service. In a very short period of time, I think it was like less than 12 to 18 months, they went from about 25 customers to 8,000 customers, and then proceeded to sell the business. And so that was a great story that resonated, and I might come back and hit on that a little bit later in my presentation. So kind of let's jump into this, and we'll start with looking at the past, right? And the past wasn't that far away. So the traditional, as kind of Bart even mentioned in the intro here, the traditional based equity approach, it worked, right? And it works, right? It works so well that the market right now is flooded with the ability as a dealership to leverage that technology. There's probably 4 or 5 standalone companies that do a little bit of marketing around that are equity specific. Most of the CRMs, have some light version of equity mining or some light equity calculation built into it. Again, I'm doing my best not to have a sales pitch here, but at Dominion, I'm proud of the fact that we were pioneers in the early days, right? We've seen a thing or two to talk about what works, what doesn't work, and what we believe probably won't work so well moving forward, right? We pioneered equity, we pioneered CRM, we pioneered retention marketing and frankly, marketing services. But like anything, right, is concepts and products evolve, right? They expand. And I think the operative word is they innovate. And I think it was the kind of Harvard Business Review author, professor at NYU, Peter Drucker, that coined the phrase, innovate or die, right? And, whether it was him or not that said it, I think everyone understands what that term and that concept means. And think about not cars for a minute, but things that we probably engage with. 3 examples here that we probably engage with every day. Music, right? Depending on how old you are, you had 8 tracks, or your parents had 8 tracks, and then those turned into tapes, and then those turned into CDs, and then that turned into iTunes, and that turned into streaming. And I think Apple's, is retiring the iPod, right? And and then how did that impact the whole radio industry? You had radio, then you had Sirius XM, and you've got Spotify, you've got Amazon, you've got iTunes. It created a whole other segments within segments. You think about texting, is, at one point you could text on the flip phones, and again, depending on how old you are, you could, is how fast you could text something using the keypad on an old flip phone. And then that turned to smartphones. And now there's a lot of talk on how do we appropriately leverage texting to do inbound and outbound marketing, right? And then think about work, right? You had, again, depending on how old you are, I used to sit in a traffic for 2 hours every day and sit in a cube, and kind of went from cubes to, open spaces with sleep pads and free dinners and meals and beers, to now there's more and more options to work from home in those hybrid flexibility models. But the commonalities, right, whether it was those use cases in music or texting or just the day-to-day work, is the commonalities between there is the companies that quote unquote innovated and didn't die, right, were the ones that were able to stay flexible. And they were the ones that were able to flex and modernize with the times. And I would argue in the world of marketing, it's all about meeting the demand that customers have. And at the end of all of those things, there was still, you have a company that's trying to offer a product or a service, and you've got customers that hopefully want to buy that or need to buy that. And the end result is, here is you're trying to get them to buy that stuff. So it's the same outcome with music. You want people to listen to it, with texting to communicate, with work to get the job done, that people are happy and they're efficient and they're productive. Kind of continuing on that with the past. So now just digging into equity itself is, for years, the kind of the model was dealerships really focused heavily, if not exclusively, on really sending out equity offers, right? Typically things kind of right at the bottom of a purchasing funnel, or at the end of the assumption at the end of the journey. And the ways to differentiate, was, from the vendor standpoint, was who could send the best offer or the most aggressive offer, who had the best score, or the best way to kind of shift through missing data or bad data, or bringing in other types of data, or, who did the best job of getting the salespeople to actually log in and leverage the systems, right? And, I'll make the provocative statement that this was really, thinking this way, it was kind of almost a race to the bottom. Because at the end of that, if you can't actually even reach the customer, what's the point, right? Or if you don't have something at the end of that to actually convert them to or sell them, what's the point? Or if service is so backed up, what's the point, right? And again, we've been in the equity solution game for over a decade, and it's not going away, right? We believe we can help you walk through how, when, where to find and engage customers. But that's kind of a cost of doing business now, right? That's not as interesting. And so what I want to focus on the next couple of slides is, how do we think about going beyond just the calculation and an offer, right? And how do we create more? How do we help you create better? How do we help you create stronger connections that create value and loyalty? Because those things are synonymous, right? You can't really have, you can't have loyalty without value, and it's hard to measure the value if you don't have the loyal customers. So that's the end goal here. So now we kind of start digging into kind of this current environment, the current situation that we're in. And traditionally, right, if you're not familiar with it, right, the whole concept here was to educate a customer on if they're in equity before they might be ready, or before they actually knew it was possible, right? That was the point, right? You have equity in your car, you can flip the keys and get something newer, shinier, at a similar or maybe even a lower price. It was new. Let's plant this idea in someone's head to flip their keys. I mean, who wouldn't respond? Who wouldn't be interested in that, right? And then behind that started to come a lot of emails, a lot of direct mail that started to flood mailboxes. And then as it became ubiquitous in the space, it started to add to what we refer to as kind of just the noise, right? And so what worked in all of our favor, right, almost overnight could start working against us, right? And then I think the inventory shortage that hit us well over a year ago, I think forced, at least speaking for ourselves here, forced us to look at and consider things a little differently. And there's, facts. There's 3 facts that I think the inventory crisis kind of forced us to address, right? One was the older approach didn't really consider the variety of factors that contribute to somebody making a decision, right? Usually making a decision can and often always does require multiple touch points. And it's important to warm a customer up to the idea of doing something, especially when they weren't previously indicating that they were ready to hear from you or to consider something. So there's a art and science on when, where, and how to start to engage somebody. And at the same time, you don't want to educate somebody that they might have equity in their car or they might be ready for service, or remind them, and then not have some follow-up to that, and then ultimately have them go elsewhere and spend their money at a competitor. The second thing that we really had to kind of look at and consider is what's the plan B if you don't have inventory, right? Or if putting them into a used car is not as simple as putting them into a new car with just different financing and credit, things like that. Or if there's a concern that, because you're low on service tax, or there's a lot of service coming in, that your service is backed up, and the last thing you want to do is create a bad customer experience and crush your CSI score. So that was something that needed to be considered. The third area is just independent of that, is the growing interest in electric vehicles and the hybrid vehicles. That changes a lot of things because for 2 reasons, right? One is, in the equity conversation, is we can't just assume that upgrading somebody to the newer version of today's daily driver is going to be the best option. And then regardless of that, the service schedules that are going to be wrapped around EV is going to require some changes in the thinking, and then sprinkle in a little bit on how to handle everything with pre-orders. And my wife is a good example. She currently has an SUV that she leases. That SUV is up a year from October, but she's now starting her process of looking around. And, right now she's very focused on getting kind of that new hybrid Jeep. And so she's in the process of talking to some dealerships and getting in through this process. And I can tell you that there's not a defined process and system in place in the 2 or 3 places that she's reached out to so far. So before we kind of jump into the future on all of this, right, let me just kind of recap a few things, because I'm kind of covering a lot of ground here, right? Number one, to be clear, equity mining, equity calculations is here to stay. But I think I want to challenge the notion that we have to rethink it, because it's not the only thing. And number 2 is, with whatever your strategy is for equity mining or customer marketing 2.0, right? Are you just adding to all the noise that's out there, or are you doing things from a strategic standpoint and a data standpoint to break through it and differentiate yourself? And number 3 to that is the EV, the pre-orders come with different buying patterns, right? That's here, right? And that's not going to go away. And it's thinking about that. Is the inventory, is it a crisis or is it an opportunity? And I go back to thinking about that example of the candidate that we talked to earlier this week in his previous business, where they had the websites. As they looked at something, one day they were thinking of closing up shop. The next day they redefined their whole business. So I'm not suggesting that you're going to go out and redefine your entire dealership business, but I am suggesting that the franchise model is strong. It's seen harder things. It's survived those things, and it's here to stay. And we're here to try to help, expedite that and make that go even faster. So now I'll flip a little bit into the future, which will kind of take us home here. And so first, let me level set on, kind of here's our, I'm not sure if it's as far as a hypothesis, but kind of here's our theory, right? And kind of 4 points to that. So point 1 is, we launched Activator as a product and as a business within Dominion at NADA in 2019 in San Francisco. And the initial was a really small team, but the initial response exceeded the expectations that we had, and things that we talked about or introduced around this whole concept of ownership verification. So following the car, following the VIN as opposed to the customer. and then leveraging that to identify the second or the third owners of a vehicle and market to them and to that to increase the size of a addressable market for a dealership. Things like marketing beyond the DMS and building that larger audience. Different strategies on data cleanse and automating some of the key tasks when it comes to customer marketing and equity marketing. And then not just focusing on one of the profit centers, but how do we combine all the profit centers into a complete journey. So there was a great response to that. But then that also, and that continued through COVID, right? But it also underscored for us the need to have a best-in-class technology stack working behind the scenes. It had to be something that could flex. And then that came into, full circle with the challenges around the inventory crisis and how to respond to that, and how to support our dealership partners from a marketing and communication standpoint. So that's point 2. And point 3 is, in order for our clients to have relevant one-to-one communications with customers and prospects, we believe that it's our responsibility to provide, this is the flex and innovate or die, right? It's our responsibility to provide a more modern approach or methods to attract new, retain the current, and intelligently engage with all of them, right? Regardless of where somebody happens to be in their buyer journey, regardless of how little or how much information we have on them or contact information we have on them. And it's our job is to figure out how to flex that on your behalf. And point 4 is, in order for us to be able to do that and to do it at scale, and to pivot to address the next thing, right? The next thing that the industry throws at us, or the next thing that the economy throws at us, or the next thing that's somebody some unforeseen coming at us, right? Is, how do we look at these things as opportunities as opposed to a crisis? There has to be a more efficient way to use data, leverage data, right? To use content. And, in my content, I mean content marketing, and not just kind of one size fits all offers, and how to leverage the systems, right? Which is the tech behind the scenes. And so when we thought about, comparing it to what we were trying to do and comparing that to some of the legacy methods or some of the legacy tools that are traditionally slow to react, or they're really just pigeonholed into doing one thing. Maybe they do that one thing well, but it doesn't allow them to react to these changes that are facing us all the time. So I think the theory is a lot of these systems were misaligned with what the customer that's buying cars and servicing cars, what they need and what they demanded. And at the same time, it's very hard for the dealership to track value and to understand the ROI. So it's ultimately, it required a different approach. So understanding kind of how we think about this is, let's boil this down into a couple specifics, right? So ultimately, we're suggesting to take a more holistic approach to the whole process of sales and service marketing, right? So it's about building value, and it's about and understanding that, right, is building a connection that someone views as valuable, right, is going to take more than a 30-day cycle in a general offer, right? To actually engage somebody through a journey from sales to service to upgrades to everything else in between is going to require a more robust and holistic approach than is often available right now. Number 2 is, we believe that dealers can do so much more beyond creating just general awareness around the ability to upgrade. That's important. That's the message that's going to get somebody's attention. But then what do you do after you have their attention and they're not ready to convert at that moment in time? We believe that dealers can do so much more and should also demand more of their partners. And so a few considerations around that, right? We like to say, meet your customers wherever they are in their journey, because they are someplace, right? They're somewhere in that journey, and find them and engage with them the right and the most appropriate way. And the message that you're sending when you're attempting to do that, that matters, right? And I'm a big analogy metaphor guy, but I'm trying not to use too many of them here. But I mean, if you think if you're going to throw a pass to somebody, that person needs to know it's coming and they need to be ready to catch it, right? And I think the final point to that is how, save for that, how else can you maintain and keep customers engaged through what's eventually going to be longer process with pre-orders? How do you keep them engaged and remembering you when they're not ready to transact, or when they might have another 9 to 12 months before they need to come in for their regular scheduled service? So kind of taking this home from kind of the art of the possible in the future is, innovation and change happens. And the COVID to inventory, to pre-orders, to electric vehicles, it all just expedited the inevitable that was coming at us no matter what, right? And if we kind of just take a step back, there's been, again, my opinion on this is there's really been 3 generations of engagement. It's all about engagement, right? But there's generations of it, and it evolves, that have kind of led us here. So I think a lot of this started probably late 90s, early 2000s, when marketing started moving away from just only newspapers and TV. And one day websites appeared, and then all of a sudden internet leads came. And, I was an internet lead manager in 1999 at a Volvo dealership in Boston, Massachusetts. And I was in the corner of the showroom with a little card table and a computer and a fax machine. And I was next to the fax machine because that's where the internet leads came through initially. And then that created the need to have an internet lead management system, right? And then that created the need a CRM. And then that started getting wrapped around equity solutions and managed marketing services. And the pros of all of that, right? I would refer to that type of engagement. It was awesome at the time, and it was what was required at the time, but it was very linear. It was very static, right? But the pros around that is it started to automate communication. It started to organize information. And, we saw that in terms of, email templates, automatic responders, reminders, equity calculations, right? The ability to do email blasts. But the downside of that was it was linear. It was very static, and over time realized it was not very flexible. And ultimately it wasn't as sticky. And then that kind of brought into the second generation, which, could probably, depending on the product or where we are, probably started at different, you can plot that at different timelines. But what I'm talking about here is automating more, right? Introducing some levels of business intelligence or data science or AI, right? Kind of true automation, right? Not just, printing off some letters or sending out some pre-scheduled emails. And then that really started to catch some fire with digital retail, which, I think in every other industry would refer to as omni-channel, right? It was this concept of having the same experience regardless of what channel you're on, and you can kind of stop and start things wherever you choose, right? And it's a consistent message throughout the whole experience. And this idea of increasing your audience and introducing different communication channels. And all those things make sense. We see it every day in our daily lives outside of automotive. It's everywhere, right? This thing is proven. But the con, right, with that is a lot of the tech that existed or exists today couldn't adjust, couldn't adapt, and it certainly couldn't understand and react to customer behavior. And so that leads us into where we want to go, and where we see this heading is kind of this third generation of engagement, which is all behavior based. And I don't mean behavior based that I have a couple cookies and someone gets retargeted, later on a website, right? I mean, this is really truly learning about a person or a group of people and the system and behaving accordingly. It's targeting appropriately. And it's not just necessarily, like I said, not targeting somebody online. It's using data and it's using behavior to inform the next action and to prioritize the next best person to call or the next best thing to send through the next best channel. And that is, that truly becomes that omni-channel and that full kind of end-to-end journey management. And so if I could just summarize this is into one statement. And, I think why this matters and why, from a dealership perspective, you should care is, unlike other businesses or segments, customers, and again, this isn't new news, right? But customers buy a car every so often, right? Every 3 to 5 years, or maybe 7 years, whatever the numbers are. It's not every year. And the service intervals are becoming longer and longer, right? So you only have so many. So last sports metaphor, I promise, but you only have so many at bats, right? And you can't afford to, you can finish it, strike out or miss, or so you've got to maximize all of these opportunities. And the point is we live in a world where the buyers are distracted and frankly, they're overwhelmed. And so more than ever is from engaging them in this environment is you have to have a stronger engagement and targeting strategy. And the systems that are supporting that have to be able to keep up, and they have to be able to flex on what's coming next. Otherwise, you're just going to end up as part of that noise, and you'll become the Walkman, or you'll become the rotary phone, or you'll become the BlackBerry, or the 64 disc CD changer. With that is just summarizing this. So I talked a little bit about attract and engage and convert, and kind of what that meant, right? And so there's these key areas here that I just want to try to hopefully tie all of this back to, right? So when you're thinking about what the system can do and should do, right, from a flexibility standpoint, what we mean by that is, are you able to, introduce new and unique campaigns that really are designed to build deeper engagement to ultimately get higher conversions that are measured. We're investing heavily ourselves into modernizing the tech that's supporting this behind the scenes, right? It's, we are taking data from multiple sources, whether it's DMS, enriched data, equity data calculations, and really wrapping that around the ability for the system to learn and react. And what that does is it creates automatic categories of customers. It automates the qualifying and prioritizes customers and leads. And really what maybe HubSpot or an Act-On or Salesforce Marketing Cloud has been doing for B2B and B2C businesses for years, we want to be able to do the same thing for dealerships. And for that, right, that leads into the ability to have better engaged customers, right? These trigger customer-focused campaigns that are wrapped around relevant content, and that have the ability to toggle between the time-based stuff that's required, right, as well as the behavior-based stuff that only a modern system can understand and react to. And, I mentioned it earlier is, it's just this concept of meeting customers where they are and using that modern technology, right? And from our perspective, we don't want dealerships to even have to worry about it. We're building this behind the scenes. And, I've sold CRM, I've sold, social tools, I've sold marketing tools. And, a lot of times I'll say, look, from the dealer's perspective, you're good at selling cars and servicing cars. That's what we want you to focus in on. We're going to provide the technology behind it, right? We kind of hit a crossroads ourselves saying, okay, we can continue to build stuff, or we can partner with somebody that can get us there faster, right? And they said the same thing to us. They said, you guys are really good at parsing data, and you're good at understanding this, and you're good at consulting with your customers to make their business go faster. We're really good at the back end on creating this platform. And so it all trickles down in a very positive way. And, from our perspective, as we're looking at that is, we want a system that allows somebody, if they want to use this hands-on, self-service, fantastic. Or if they want some reasonable services wrapped around that, kind of looking at the next best campaign. It's kind of we want to kind of have that one size fits all type of approach. So so that kind of wraps up my presentation on here. So I hope I was able to kind of paint a good picture in terms of, you know, the opportunity on where equity and customer marketing can go, because that's where it's headed, and how you can support that with better tech. And ultimately from a, you know, how do we help attract, how do we engage and convert more customers? So thanks for listening to that. And I'll kind of turn it over to Bart with any questions that have come in.
Thanks, Bobby. Feel free to ask some questions. I'm going to kind of, I just want to kind of pick your brain a little bit here while we wait for these questions to come in. As I've been thinking about this, it seems like that we've got two life cycles that we can look at this, the two lenses we can go through. One is we can look at the customer life cycle, right? They purchased a vehicle, they got more of their vehicles in their family, they've got to service the vehicle, they, you know, they're up for, you know, lease returns, or they're up for other vehicles. And that's typically and traditionally, I think the approach has been taken. But the other side of it is the vehicle life cycle. You mentioned the VIN. I've talked to a dealer who said, oh, we just did a little bit of detective work. We've sold the same Tacoma 3 times. And he kind of went through and talked about the grosses that have been made on that vehicle. We always talk about customers are worth X amount, $100,000 in their life, but that vehicle is also a valuable asset that you can leverage. So I think as we're looking at this, it's not about, and I'm hoping you can tell me if I'm full of it, but it's not about, hey, Mr. Johnson, your vehicle has equity. Did you know we can lower your payment? That's great. But I think what you're saying is that we need to look at this holistically and all of the different components that go into this, and how can we capitalize or maximize on what we know about people and the vehicle, and keep them in our ecosystem. Is that fair to say?
No, it's really fair to say. Yeah. So I mean, I think on two of those things is, so that first I'll hit the customer lifecycle part of that, and then next I'll kind of hit, you know, staying in touch with the vehicle itself. Is so with the customer lifecycle is, I mean, look, most dealerships, you know, want to or are required, right, to follow certain things that, you know, are within from the OEM perspective, right? But the bottom line is the journey, the customer, it's not a linear process, right? I mean, I'm a perfect example of that, right? I used to live in a major city in Boston, and I never drove, right? I mean, I took an Uber to the airport, I walked to the grocery store, I walked my son to school, and if we would go away on the weekends was the only time I would get into my vehicle, right? And now we moved into a little bit more of a rural area, a few states up in Vermont, and I drive everywhere, right? I've probably drove more in the past 12 months than I did in 3 years living in Boston, right? So my service schedule has and I'm driving a completely different vehicle than I did when I lived in Boston. So my schedule has completely changed, right? So it would be inappropriate if I got the same schedule that reminders and things that I may have gotten a couple of years ago. And that impacts the relevancy, and does the dealership really understand me, and the value that I perceive on the communication that I'm getting. And then, yeah, the whole idea of the car, I mean, we've all experienced, you know, going into our mailbox and getting the flyer that says, you know, hey, reminder, your car's due for service and you haven't owned it in 5 years, right? Or, you know, we get the call from somebody on an extended warranty on something I didn't own, you know, 10 years ago, right? And so we have figured out a unique way, right? So that is valuable to the dealership, and especially in the day on everyone's trying to figure out any way, shape, form, fashion they can get more used cars, right? But we have the ability to, instead of following the customer that now has traded in that car or sold that car, no longer owns it, but is still attached to that customer, to that car record in the DMS, we've figured out a way to go out and follow the vehicle identification number, follow the VIN of the car, and then identify who's potentially driving that vehicle now, and then have some strategies on trying to how attract and engage and bring that person in, right? But what you send to that person who isn't expecting to hear from you, right? Who might not need service, right? If you send them inappropriate information, that you could shoot yourself in the foot right away. So there is an art to science. There's a science to finding them and to reaching them. And then there's an art on getting the right message. And that is just traditional, marketing 101.
Well, you kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, but also I think that the good news is customers have equity in their cars. The bad news is we've got nothing to put them in. And I think that that's a really interesting problem to have.
Yeah.
And you mentioned pre-orders and the value of kind of leveraging that and building a process around and getting your dealership's culture into pre-order. And have you noticed that this obviously, if I can keep the customer from shopping 12 dealerships and looking at 86 websites and come back to me, that's one of the values of this, of equity mining. But where we haven't got the vehicles, does the same logic apply? How should we be looking at that? And then, how do we insulate our dealers to where when inventory does come back, that they're going to be okay?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that I think that's a $64,000 question, right? I think, and I think we believe that the future of, I think pre-orders is a little bit similar to, it was in response to, holy smokes, what do we do, right? To, it makes a lot of sense for the manufacturers, makes a lot of sense for a consumer, and then hopefully in time it's going to make a lot of sense for the dealership as well. But I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And so we believe that the future of that will really be ticked and tied back to digital retailing and some of the similar build a car solutions that are available and have been available right now. Some of it is still wait and see, but in the short time where we're seeing some success, it's it's simple, but I gave the example of Erica, my wife. We haven't seen that experience where, they're being directed, there's a call to action. So you're starting to create a database of these customers, marketing to them appropriately, getting them connected with somebody or a team of people in the dealership that's doesn't need to be the only thing they're focused on, but one of their objectives is to maintaining that group of people to prevent them from going to 9 other stores and prevent them from looking at 86 different websites and kind of keeping them engaged. And a lot of that comes from having some valuable content and some strategies around the way, so they don't slip, because Erica's 18 months away from buying something, but
right.
She talks about it every day. So
yeah, it's amazing how that works. And the supply chain issues that we've obviously, inventory is glaring, but the other thing, and I've experienced this outside of automotive and inside of automotive, is I think it's amazing that service is doing as well as it has been. You've got people that just are, their service departments are slammed. So what's the value in a strategy like this? If you're like, I could very easily, if I'm short-sighted, say, look, man, I got no cars, and I got no service bays that are open. I'm good. Why do I need to even be doing this stuff, right? What do you say to somebody who has that kind of thinking?
Yeah, well, so I was out last week with one of our sales reps, and we walked into a dealership who, kind of the first things out of his mouth was, he said, listen, unless you can help me find new cars, right? And find new cars, help me find more used cars and sell those. I don't want to, we've got really nothing to talk about, right? Because I still have a number of new cars on my lot. I'm lucky. I'm going to sell them all this month, and it's going to be through no effort of anybody else other than the fact that it's supply and demand, right? And my service department right now is backed up, right? We hear that all the time, and that is, it's a valid argument, right? We have to listen to that. But to the earlier point, and the way that we're looking at that is like, you're not shutting the service department down, right? You're not turning your lights off. You're not shutting the website off, right? You're not completely abandoning all marketing. It's just the approach and the strategy to that marketing. And if you agree with the fact that, the customer life cycle is not linear, I'm the perfect example of that, right? On what I used to do living in one geographic area versus what I do now living in another. It's different for everybody. And The person who isn't ready to service right now is the person that's going to have a check engine light on tomorrow, right? And what we want people to think about is to future-proof the absorption challenges that will happen down the road, right? Because we are going to get chips and we are going to get inventory, and eventually this is going to take care of itself. But in 12 to 24 months, what are you doing now to build that value and to build that engagement so that those people, you keep them top of mind and you ensure that they're thinking of you first when they need to come back? So we're not suggesting that you're trying to flood everyone into your service department, but we are certainly suggesting that you continue to try to attract and maintain and build those relationships. And then PS, as more and more EVs come to the market, as more and more hybrids come in, right? For the people that, are freaked out about a car that can only go 50 miles and they don't have the infrastructure in order to charge those. And I think, hybrids is where a lot of people will that aren't the early adopters will go that route first. Regardless of any of the things that are happening today, that's going to completely change the way that we market and the way that we talk to people about their service schedules. So you can kind of get on the bandwagon now.
Makes sense. Well, I appreciate it, Bobby. I'm having any additional questions come in, just the ones that we kind of talked about. So everyone, thank you for joining us. Once again, this recording will be out for everyone to take a look at. You can review it again and kind of look and think behind what Bobby's saying and kind of where the industry's headed, where equity mining or owner marketing, whatever you want to call it, is headed. Bobby, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. It was great. And thanks everybody for joining.
We hope to see you all on future driving sales webinars. Have a good weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everybody.